webinar. So thank you everybody for joining us this morning, and good morning. I think hopefully for most of us, we're on the West Coast, right? Happy Friday. I do want to say a special thank you to those of you that were registered for the original scheduling of this webinar back in mid-June. Unfortunately, I got COVID as I think now almost everybody seems to be getting it at this stage. And so we had to postpone this. So thanks for coming back. We appreciate it. I am Brennan, president of Bright Talent. And we also have Renee Maurer, who is our head of operations. I will be your host for the webinar today. And Renee is going to be more or less behind the scenes, helping moderate and helping with the webinar. And then she'll also be leading the Q&A towards the end of this session. This webinar is part of our Rapid Change Management series, and Renee is going to bring up our website so I could just quickly give you context of what this webinar is about. So with all the change that has gone on in HR and all of the different projects that HR has had to take on in this 2.5, 3 years, we saw an opportunity to give back to our community because HR operations is an area of our expertise for us. And so we thought we really should build some free tools for our community so they can download and have templates and really kind of some good instruction on how to affect change. And so if you went to our website, which is brighttalent.com, and you were to click on the green banner at the top that says Rapid Change Management Playbook, that's going to take you to our Rapid Change Management website. And hopefully it's working, Renee.
Amen.
All right, just slow with everything. And so if you were to click on that, you're going to get, here we go, the Rapid Change Management website. And the Rapid Change Management website really is in 3 sections. So we have on my left, we have the playbook that's ready for you to download. And again, that's full of lots of instructions and materials to help you really consistently put programs into place. And then we have the webinar series is what you're attending now. And then we actually have services. So if you're not in a position to do it yourself or have the resources to do it yourself, we are here to help you as well. So that's good, Renee, thank you. And so when we thought about the webinar, we thought, okay, there's so much going on. There's so much change going on. And like we were joking in the pre-conversation about this, you know, as HR leaders, you can only know so much. There is just this book of knowledge, breadth of knowledge in the HR field. We can only know so much. So the area of global mobility, we saw as an opportunity, especially with remote work, how that has really changed. And a lot of us might not know exactly all the details behind that. And then our first webinar was on environmental health and safety. So you might want to go back and check that out on our website, where we're going to record all of these webinars and leave them ready to watch on demand on our website on that Rapid Change Management page. And then the design was, let's create a webinar, let's create a just really short podcast style, kind of informal with experts on specific topics, and even on specific topics, let's just drill into a couple that really are top of mind. And so that's the premise behind this webinar and the Rapid Change Management series. And what's important to note is the agenda. So I'm going to do this quick intro, then we're going to get into our conversation with our guest today, who I'll introduce in 1 second. And then we'll have about 10 minutes of Q&A. So that's really your opportunity to ask the expert. And so the Q&A is going to work like this. We have, just because this is such a short time period, we've opened up the Q&A question and answer feature in this Zoom webinar functionality. And so just drop your questions in, and then Renee will ask those questions for you, because we really don't have time to get into longer conversations to open it up to the guests. Then after the end of this webinar, we are recording it. We will download it to our website. And then also Gaby has given us other materials that will be free for download with this webinar. So in about a week, you'll be notified when this webinar is downloaded and the materials are downloaded, and you can go back and watch it and also download these materials. So with that, I'm very excited to talk about this topic, work from anywhere, not so fast. As I mentioned, the idea, and I took advantage of this too, especially during the pandemic, the idea of working from anywhere is so romantic and it sounds so awesome. And a lot of people have taken advantage of this, but reality is setting in. And I'm starting to see even more organizations say, you know, you can work from anywhere that we are registered to work. They're starting to qualify these statements. And so I feel this topic is relevant. So in the spirit of really staying very focused, we're going to talk about two areas of global mobility. We're going to talk about work authorization, and we're going to talk about the tax implications behind it. And I am not qualified to talk about this, but I am qualified to ask questions. So thankfully, we have our special guest today, Gaby LaHerran. And Gaby is founder of To Go Global Mobility and Immigration Consulting. With over 20 years experience, she's led the strategic direction and operational optimization of global mobility organizations in growth environments for some of the world's most innovative companies, including Airbnb, Levi Strauss, and Bird Rides. And so, Gaby, we are so excited to have you here joining us to talk about this important topic. And I think just to get the conversation started, relating to work authorization, if employees want to work in a different state or country, what are some steps employers should take to mitigate the risks of non-compliance?
Well, when you're looking at employees, you really have to look at it in two ways. Are they already there or are they going? And that's very important. And when you're looking at, you have to look at it through, strictly speaking, the work authorization piece. How did they enter the country if they're already there? And how you want them to enter the country that they have not yet gone. Mm-hmm. Individuals over the last year and a half, longer, have been entering as tourists. And now with the digital remote visas in about 45 countries as of today, this is a real opportunity to help your employees partner with them on behalf of those visas, because that authorizes not just their ability to stay. Individuals kind of think when you go into a country and if I'm let in, I can work and I can stay. Two different pieces. Another thing they need to look at is the duration. How long will you partner with your employee in allowing them to stay? How long does the category in which they will work in, short-term, long-term, digital, remote, allow them to stay legally, to confer that authorization duration of stay? You also need to look at, and we'll move to the tax piece of it, but specific to the mobility, you need to look at their own citizenship, the employee citizenship, and very importantly, what their role responsibilities are. The role responsibilities of what they're actually doing really are going to be instructive on the type of work authorization that will be required for them. And again, it can trigger tax.
Okay. And so in terms of a matter of understanding, because I have a good friend and his daughter is now traveling to Costa Rica, Albania, Croatia, how do we keep track of where our employees are working? Because you can almost, again, just be anywhere in the world and people might not even know the location you're working from. So the idea of tracking, which is, unpopular and popular. So the idea of tracking your employees, is this a good idea? And perhaps how is this done? And, setting a policy about this.
Many companies are tracking to do the work, the impact, the compliance impact, and what it can trigger if an employee is not in the right employment authorization classification in the country in which they're working. Again, can also trigger tax. I would say that, and this is really, many companies attached to their business travel have tracking. They've engaged in those type of tools. Right. So individuals then will input where they are in that tracking system. Some companies do it rather manually. I don't encourage that, but if you have a smaller company and mobility is going to track that, that can also work. But generally speaking, the larger companies and mid-sized companies are participating and partnering with vendors to have tools and systems in place to track their employees.
Specifically internationally, relating to that, I remember us kind of the pre-conversation we had. There are some countries that have a digital remote visa, right. And so they're very friendly as it relates to working visas, and it's probably much easier, I'm assuming, to register as a company to work in that country. Maybe touch on that topic for these folks in attendance that maybe have some of these employees that aspire to go work for a couple of months somewhere else and then come back into the United States.
The digital remote visa is a very personal experience. It's an individual employee experience. It's important that if the company is going to provide guidelines and include and support the remote visas as part of the mobility program, that they will know where their employees are in utilizing digital remote visas. It is not typical for a company to come in and have 20 sponsor 20 digital remote visas. The employees themselves file for these visas and they process them themselves. I do encourage, if you're working with a company, that you share that process and what information you've provided in that process with your mobility or HR department as is required. But the digital remote visa is a personal process you go through. You apply for it. It shares with you how long you can work, what duties you can perform. Some also include the tax that's due. Okay. And some, it provides, the country provides guidelines on your stay, your duration of stay, what you can do there.
So let's bring it back closer to home in the US. I have a friend that's applying to new jobs, and there's some organizations that are actually saying in their job posting, if you live in these states, do not apply for this job. So that's a new development that I haven't seen before. Maybe speak about, when should an employer say no to a location that an employee would like to work? And it's interesting because I wrote that question before even hearing about this story. So this is alive and well. Organizations are now becoming more educated about this, about remote work. They're putting their guidelines around it. So just kind of surprised, we joked, is that state discrimination? Can you actually put that in a posting? But either way, it was interesting to hear that. So when can we say no as an employer, or should say no to remote?
I think when you're both managing compliance for both the company and the employee. Some companies the companies look at the tax piece of this. And if you're speaking strictly within the United States, there's withholding tax. And if I'm working in certain states, my presence there can trigger a dual taxation for me in the state that I'm actually payrolled in and the state that I'm actually working in. So this isn't just all about the company. The companies themselves are staying in compliance with their withholding, Social Security, safety, benefits, etc. Right. But it's also tax related. The piece I'm addressing is tax. So they're trying to keep their employees safe too, for not having and presence triggering dual tax presence and withholding for them.
Well, this is great. A great bridge now into the tax implications of remote work. So when we think about that, then you're really touching on this. Help us understand the tax implications of workplace locations, because just give us a flavor for, California, New York, New Jersey. They tend to be states that it's a little bit tougher to be an employer than, let's say, somewhere in the Midwest or the South. Maybe touch on that for us if we're an organization that's working outside of California and now we have employees that want to work in California. What are some of the tax implications?
In California, well, California.
Or just that example of comparing.
No, I'll actually, it's a good example. Well, a couple. California and New York are states that if you're going to work, if you're payrolled in those states and you're going to work elsewhere, the state does not release you from state tax obligation for 18 months. So again, you trigger dual tax. And the state of New York and California are very, very serious about collecting their taxes. Yes. And so they really, it's a serious matter for them. If you come to California, and let's say you live in another state, you come to California, California taxes from day one. So if I'm living in another state and I'm payrolled in another state, California starts taxing from day one. And as opposed to when I live and work in another country, if I want to come to the United States and other countries have tax treaties between them. So that is to mitigate or at least reduce dual taxation for the employee. However, there is no tax treaties between the states in the United States. And so individuals have to be really aware and informed as to what their tax obligations might look like after they finish their tenure or their remote stay in the state they're working in.
So maybe just a great example of this is if somebody's coming out to California to stay for a month, as an employer that's maybe headquartered outside of California, and this is going to be true for any state for that matter, when should we start? When should tenure, the amount of time that they're actually staying in one location, when should we start being concerned about that?
Well, it's really about managing risk and your tolerance for risk. And
Okay.
I've seen company and just to be transparent, some companies make that balance that risk with the salary of the individuals that are working remote within those states, because that creates a higher visibility, the salaries and the roles. And therefore, some companies say 30 days in and out, we're not going to attach a lot of risk to the tax. Other companies are looking at if you're there 60 days, 90 days, we're going to look very carefully and partner with our mobility tax advisors to do a cost estimate to see what the reality is, where you're going to pay taxes, how those taxes are going to be paid. And when you're looking at it, it's not just in-state tax, it's also triggering having to prepare an income tax return in perhaps 1 or 2 locations and for the employee. So again, it's really focused on the employee. You know, most of us find it challenging enough to do one income tax return. But for someone that's working and being payrolled, working in one state and being payrolled in the other, that could trigger 2 state income tax returns. It's important to be informed.
So you had educated me on the term tax resident. So maybe this is an opportunity to talk about the term tax resident and maybe inform some of us that didn't really understand the context of that, because it sounds like that's almost what you're speaking to. So help us understand the tax resident term and maybe the details behind that.
It's how a state sees you. And
Gabby, I'm sorry.
Generalization, Gabby, I've made a couple of California.
You froze for just a second.
So sorry.
That first comment. So what was the first comment to that question?
States have their own tax presence laws. And so it's important, if you're going to work in a state, that you look at what the tax requirements are in that state, which the way they view tax presence. How many days you can work in that state? What are you doing in that state? Is it training? Are you actually working? Are you engaged? Are you living there? All of that can create tax presence. So it's very important, and it's per state.
Okay, per state. So this is very important to know. This goes along with registering to work in a state or not.
Right. You know, you have multi-state. You can have multi-state withholding, and there's of course the social insurance issues, the payroll withholding in different states.
Sure.
All those things are the pieces that are important when you're looking at having employees or supporting employees working remote.
So we're just about to the end of our time for our discussion before we moved into Q&A, but just one last comment, and really to kind of tie this up in a bow a little bit, because again, the 3 areas, immigration, which we really didn't even touch on that much, as I think probably most of us here are focused on the United States, tax and work authorization. So what are some key components of creating a remote policy then? And maybe help the group understand, like, here are the things you need at the high level, here are the things that you need to really cover in a remote work policy.
I will absolutely answer that. There's one piece of immigration that I'd like to add rather quickly,
Okay.
And it's called border entry. And it's really important that a company, if they know their employees are going into different countries, they're going to be going through border entry and customs, that those individuals are briefed either by legal counsel or by internal mobility on how to manage those conversations going through border entry, to keep themselves safe, to keep them in compliance, the documents they should be carrying with them. It's amazing. Individuals will just go. They don't have payroll checks indicating they're being paid somewhere else. They don't have certain documents, a list of documents that they should have. I wanted to share that. Border entry is so important for both the employee and the company. And that's a piece that tends to be not focused on, but it would really strongly counsel that remote employees be counseled on how to manage comfortably that border entry process.
Thank you for that, because obviously a little Mexico, workplace sounds really good right about now on the coast. So this is important to know.
It is important. You don't want to be detained, and nor do you want to in any way jeopardize if you're in non-immigrant status. You already have a work permit somewhere. That situation can compromise that, and so you want to make sure. When you're building a remote program, you have to look at your culture, and you have to look at your tolerance level for risk. You have to review what roles will be eligible, what locations, do location assessments. All of that is your due diligence. What are the tax requirements and laws in those locations you're considering? Will any of those locations relative to role eligibility trigger permanent establishment, which is an interesting tax concept for corporations? By virtue of the presence of that employee in a location, it can trigger a possible corporate tax requirement and tax filing for the employer. And all of those things, when you're conducting due diligence, you need to consider all those things. And then if you choose governance, who's going to be, the eligibility, who's going to go, how long are they going to go for, what's your exception process, what is your authorization process for your employees? And then you look at the security around all of that, how to keep your employees secure, benefits, attention, and then the change management, which I call evolving your change management, your socialization. How are you going to socialize this new remote worker policy? A few years ago, I developed a program called the 30-60-90. And because I was in a situation where we had projects all over the world, people needed to go for 30, 60, 90 days. They needed to go quickly, and we wanted them to be in compliance. And so I developed the 30, 60, 90 day program, and we launched that. And so you have to look at all of those items when you're creating a program.
I think that's great. So really it is not wise to have just an open-ended work anywhere for any period of time type of policy. There really needs to be some dates around it. So you could probably—
There needs to be some governance and some as they say, guardrails around it.
Yeah.
Some people like to use regulations and rules. Other companies don't like that word. They use guidelines, guardrails. But there does, and not just for corporate compliance and to mitigate risk. You're also helping your employees, I've shared, mitigate risk.
Right. And that's obviously what compliance is all about.
We want to make sure that everyone, both on the company side and employee side, are safe and mitigating risk.
So thank you. So we're going to move now to our Q&A portion. And so for the attendees, this is your opportunity in the Q&A functionality of the webinar tool here to ask your questions. And then Renee, who is behind the scenes here, is going to ask those questions on your behalf. So Renee, and ask anything you'd like of Gabby. This is your opportunity. So Renee, do we have any questions?
Yeah, so you kind of might have already touched a little bit on this, but one question that came through a little earlier on was, why should companies be concerned about the permanent establishment for the remote employees?
That's an important piece. If you are headquartered, should we say, for example, in the United States, and your remote employee is working in another country, and they're by virtue of what they're doing, presence in that country, and specifically what they're doing in that country, their role responsibilities. Just to mention one, signature authority, sales, there are different responsibilities that are more likely to trigger the permanent establishment. It can trigger tax responsibility, debt and liability for the parent company, your employer, into that with that host country. And the host country can take the position that they will source income from the home country into the host country. And that's a very, very permanent establishment is complex. And so we do advise that you partner with your corporate tax team and your mobility tax team in reviewing. But you don't want to find yourself, by virtue of the fact that you have an employee somewhere, their presence and what they're doing triggers a permanent establishment of the home corporation in the host location.
All right, thank you. I have another question that came through. So how do you handle when you actually find out that someone is in a different location, but the employee didn't tell you? So somehow you come across this information. What do you do? Yeah.
All the time. It happens. Everybody on this call knows it happens all the time.
Yep.
It goes back to your guidelines, guardrails, and rules. First thing I do immediately, where are you? How did you enter that country? What are you doing there? And how long have you been there? That's the questions you need to ask. Then you need to ask yourself, can this employee continue to work? What immigration piece can we do? What is the status? to be able to legalize that person in the country, provide them legal authorization to work and reside again in that country. What are the tax pieces? Has this created a risk already for the company? Has created a risk for the employee? So it's about doing retroactive due diligence, and based on the answers to all of that due diligence as how you would counsel whether or not you would have the employee stay. Some countries you could have the employee exit and come back in the right category and for a defined period of time. Other countries, that's inadvisable. And so it's really going back, doing retroactive due diligence for both the company and the employee. You can build support where you can, but I don't want to say that everything is wonderful everywhere. Sometimes an employee's presence in a country and what they're doing is creating risks for the company. And the company is going to have to look at that and decide, can I really support this employee in this location? I know everyone wants to, and will try to do their best to do so. However, it isn't always the best thing for the company and the employee themselves.
Renee?
All right. Thank you. So Brennan, we're actually at the end of our time.
Well, is there any more questions from the attendees? Because I'd love to I'm okay going over a little bit.
Okay.
If
All
we
right.
get a question answered.
Yeah, no, there is one other one really quick here. I know you touched on digital visas and such, but there is a question about digital nomad visas.
Yeah, visas. Popular now, very popular.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the term nomad visas. So can you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, I've added actually in my supplemental materials, and yes, I'd be happy to. Nomads are individuals that are working and traveling, well, traveling everywhere, and specific to the term nomad. And so about a couple of years ago, we started hearing this term digital nomad visas. So individuals are allowed, certain countries, I think it's 45 now, have allowed individuals to apply for those visas online, and they apply for them online, and they fill out an application. The instructions are very specific on what that visa allows them to do, how long it allows them to stay, and some of the other items around their duration of stay. And it's become quite popular. You know, I think when the pandemic started, individuals were going in tourist or visa exempt. You know, there are countries that are visa exempt, don't require you to have a visa. But now in some countries that started this digital nomad visa, it was to really increase tourism in their country and improve their local economies. And I remember some of the first countries that did that saying, please come to these islands and work, and we'll allow you to work here for 6 months, because of course, when you're working somewhere, it improves the local economy. And then it moved on to other countries seeing the benefits both from the corporate side and employee side to having individuals have this experience in different countries, not just in, you know, economically centered. So I have provided supplemental materials on the digital nomad visa, and if you Google it or any other search engine that you use, you'll see a lot of information on it. It's really fascinating, and I personally, as an immigration professional, find it fun to read through it and encouraging. Actually, it's evolving.
Great. Well, that is a wrap. Again, we want to make this quick and focused and intentional. So thank you everybody for attending. And I just want to extend another thank you to Gabby for being here for us to help us understand a little bit more about this complex world of global mobility. So I wish everybody a great day. Thanks for attending.
Thank you, everyone.
All right.
Thank you.